Rein it in. Hello, all, and welcome to the 2024 Black New England Conference. Once again, my name is Shari Robinson, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing myself as the president of the board of directors of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. Okay. For those of you who are new to our conference, welcome. For our returning attendees, we are so grateful for your continued support and the support of our sponsors, who you will see on the screen behind me. Okay. There you go. It's just magic. Okay. And who are included in your program booklet. We will honor them again at the end of our day. We are so excited to kick off this event. So let's get this party started. I am so honored to introduce my new best friend and welcome Southern New Hampshire University new president, Lisa Marsh Ryerson, who will now say a few words.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm so excited to be with you. I'm Lisa Marsh Ryerson and proud to be the president of Southern New Hampshire University. Isn't it a glorious day to be here celebrating living out loud and all of the great work of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire? Jerry Ann, it's such a treat to meet you today and also to honor your work and Sherry's work and to know that you are an SNHU grad. I think there are many either parents or grads in the room. I have been in New Hampshire for just 2 years, so it's a new place for me. And as I was learning about the work and about this conference, it became very important to me to know that I would have a community of learners who come together as activists and educators, as neighbors, doing important research, sharing stories, and recognizing that every story matters and connection is powerful. And it is powerful here at SNHU. We've sponsored the conference for 5 years. I think, Sherry, we've hosted it right here on our campus, really intentionally. Chris, 3 years for 3 years. And it's because the power of EDI lives at SNHU, whether it's our academic curricula, our programs with our learners, 250,000 of them all over the nation and all over the world, and the intentionality with which we weave and embed our goals for EDI in everything that we do. So it's a glorious day to come together, an important time in society for us to be here together. And I'm excited to make new best friends and to know all of you and to thank you for your volunteerism, for your spirit, for the work that you do here in New Hampshire and beyond. And now I think it's my great delight, Chris, to welcome you to the podium, my colleague and faculty member here at SNHU, Chris Matthews. Yeah.
You are definitely in for a treat today. And before we jump in, just want to provide you with a quick recap of what happened last night. For those that are not aware, last night we held a little pre-conference session at the Courier Museum. It was a film and discussion on Bayard Rustin, who was an activist, very instrumental in the planning and the implementation of the March on Washington with Martin Luther King. The students that are volunteering today from Southern New Hampshire University are taking a class with me. Business 225, Critical Skills in Business, and they had to collect and conduct their very first qualitative survey with the guests that attended last night. And I want to share with you some of the results from that survey. Guests were asked, for example, what was your greatest takeaway? And here are some of the comments. I was really struck by Rustin's ability to really put himself at the forefront, despite being gay and Black. Another attendee responded, I am impressed that the entire film was really dedicated to something that I had no prior knowledge about. Another responded, I was really struck that Rustin displayed so much perseverance and grit in the work that he was doing. One of the questions that the students asked our attendees to respond to was, do you believe there is potential for individual impact on social change? I'm happy to report that 100% of respondents to this survey said yes. And I think that is a good indication of where we are today. You are here today for a reason. You have been called here today for a reason. And even though it's not Sunday, we're gonna go to church for a reason today. All right. We're going to make it happen. And so I encourage you as we start today's session to really take it in personally, to really challenge yourselves to think about and to reflect upon the things that you're learning today. The work of the Black Heritage Trail in putting together and organizing the Black New England Conference is truly amazing. The lineup of panelists and speakers will blow you away today. Probably the worst thing is that you're going to have to deal with me serving as the MC, but I promise to keep the movement flowing. And on that note, I would like to begin by introducing our next panel moderator. Probably needs no introduction at all, But the moderator for this next panel, our first panel, Beyond Erasure, Black Queer Trailblazers and Their Legacies, is Dr. Dottie Morris. She currently serves, yes, hands up. She currently serves as the Vice President for Institutional Equity and Diversity and is a member of the College President's Cabinet at Keene State College. Dr. Morris, you ready? We got you. All right.
Good morning. I don't believe you. Good morning. Thank you very much. Can the panelists come up? The most important people that of this panel. That's right. Good morning. All I'm gonna do is moderate. But I was asked to say just a few words to set the context of this particular panel. I think it is important that we are starting with this panel because it's creating a context to understand how often and how long Black queer people have been erased. When you were talking about Rustin, erased. It wasn't until recently that we started to hear about how the March on Washington would not have taken place had it not been for him and his ability to organize and create situations that would allow for something that large to take place. So it's good that we're starting with this historical part to look at not only the ancestors, but some of the elders who paved the way for a lot of people to be living out loud and proud today. So this whole idea of standing on the shoulders of giants, we all stand on the shoulders in one way or another of a group of people who went ahead of us. And so that's why I'm so happy we're starting with this particular panel to help you remember, to bring us back to the place that we will remember those who went before us and allowed us to be able to be here today and have this conversation out loud. So we have to think about things like Stonewall. And we're not talking about a wall or Stonewall Jackson, but we're talking about something that started a movement. And even before then, but when we think about Stonewall, when we think about all of these movements that even today we continue to build on those. One thing I want to talk about, one thing I want to say before we get started is, if we are about true liberation, because we're not just talking about survival, that we have to honor every aspect of our identities and how they intersect. So when we think about being Black or a person of color, when we think about gender, when we think about all of these things that come together, when Kimberly Crenshaw talks about it, at that intersection, how do we honor all of those parts without disenfranchising any part or any individual within the communities that we live? Okay, so today, that's what we're doing. We're honoring that. And the more that we tell those stories, the harder it will be in the future to erase. So we're going to reawaken some things today. And I hope that regardless of who you are, where you sit in the world, that you're really able, and not only able, but willing to stand up for liberation. We are about liberation. We ain't about survival. Survival is good, but liberation does last a lot longer. So without further ado, what will happen is each panelist will speak for as long as they would like to. Because I don't have my timer up here, so and I have no concept of time. So that's a bad combination. But you know, they have it. They're professionals here. And then after that, we'll have a conversation, and with all of us in this call response kind of environment we're in right now. So that's what will happen. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves because I'm never sure what people want me to say about them. So I prefer for people to use their own voice to tell us who they are rather than me reading something. So I would like for, if that's possible, you could tell us who you are.
Well, my name is Ray Diamond. I'm a professor of law at Louisiana State University. I've been doing this for a good many years. I hail from Yale Law School, which is a point that will be important to the story about Pauli Murray that I will be presenting. I think that's all I want to say about me.
See, I would have read the entire.
My name is Tanisha Johnson. I am the co-founder and board chair of Black Lives Matter New Hampshire. I'm also the vice chair of Black Heritage Trail, director of Child and Family Services at Community Action Partnership of Stratford County, and also the co-host of a podcast called The Conversations We Should Be Having. Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know I was first. Y'all gotta wake up. We gotta get some pep in here. Y'all mind if I talk a little stuff this morning? Talk it? All right. So, thank you. Well, that's me. My slideshow. I want to talk about this morning a little bit about those who are drawn outside the color lines, which is what I call it. So as long as there have been Black, Indigenous people of color, there have been Black, Indigenous people of color who identify within the queer community. What we have learned is that racism combined with the forces of stigma, phobia, discrimination, and bias associated with gender, sexuality, and color have erased the historical contributions of our people, but not the impact. We collectively, I hope, are fully aware of the ways in which Black trailblazers are hidden from the whitewashed retelling of so-called American history. However, when we don't think about or think beyond just culture and race, we miss how deep that erasure is when it comes to the intersection of race and queerness. We know that Black history has been primarily limited to enslavement and segregation. However, Black people are not a monolith. While our shared experiences around racism and systemic oppression bond us, our myriad of identities cannot be boxed into one size fits all history, curriculum, books, movies, and even our real life. They just gave me the slides, so good. Ooh, I'm pressing buttons. We're gonna forget that. We're gonna pivot. That's how we work. So when the lovers, friends, and families of Black queer historical figures are buried in the footnotes of history, the erasure directly impacts internal and external views on what is possible for our Black future. My Blackness is essential to my authenticity. It shapes how I see the world and how that world sees me. My yearning to learn about our Black history is spiritual for me. I want to know how my ancestors loved themselves and each other, how they created those acts of resistance in a world that tried to erase them. It's how I can move through the world as my most authentic self. As a queer Black woman, I am performing that balancing act as a direct result of my intersecting identities. To reject that concept of intersectionality is denying my ancestors and my own lived experiences who have or had to navigate a world that causes so much harm. Because Black queer history is complex, it's rich, it's traumatic, but it's also a harsh reality of our nation's past, dark past, and our current state of society. And as I thought about those in history, I realized these folks really embody that statement of being drawn outside the lines. They defied those stereotypes, the bias, the box we as Black people are often forced into. Their impact pushed boundaries, and the result is unfiltered beauty. Those like who we learned about last night, Bayard Rustin, who was a prominent figure in the civil rights movement, key advisor to MLK. He was honored posthumously for his impact and hidden from history because of his sexuality in the past. Folks like him paved the way for activists like Patrice Cullins, who co-founded the Black Lives Matter national movement. We got Marsha P. Johnson, an outspoken transgender rights activist pivotal to the Stonewall riots, but has been overlooked in the past because that story has been mainly told from a cis white male perspective. We got Alan Locke, known as the creator of the philosophical concept of the new Negro, credited to start the Harlem Resistance. He also created the standard of what most African American history curriculum is built on. However, it's not really known that he was a gay man making that historical impact. He had James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, Countee Collins, writers who shaped stories and poems and books and narratives, giving our people voices, depth, and exposure. Ethel Waters, Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey defied the Harlem Renaissance, inspiring so much in entertainment. I'm gonna push it and say they inspired Beyonce's Renaissance. You got Harlem's most famous lesbian, Gladys Bentley in the 30s, who was the epitome of progress that isn't made in private, is often made on stage. Gladys set the stage for trailblazers like RuPaul and his contributions that continue to shape drag culture. Lorraine Hansberry was inspired by the Langston Hughes poem, Harlem, a Dream Deferred, to write that groundbreaking play, A Raisin in the Sun. Her queer identity was sealed and only discovered after her death. Queer activists and politicians from our past, like Ernestine Eckstein, Barbara Jordan, Miss Major Griffin Gracie, who paved the way for our people now to be out and open, like Ron Oden, the first openly gay Black man elected to mayor of Palm Springs in 2003. Lori Lightfoot, Chicago's first open lesbian Black mayor in 2019, and Andrea Jenkins, who made history in 2017 as the first transgender Black woman elected to public office. Audre Lorde, self-described Black, lesbian, feminist, mother, poet, warrior. She made generational impact to the feminist theory, queer theory, critical race theory, everything. But she said it well when she said, I write for women who do not speak, for those who do not have a voice because they are so terrified, because we are taught to respect fear more than ourselves. We've been taught silence would save us, but it won't. Those cultural contributions of Black queer individuals continue to remain influential as a symbol of resistance, resilience, and creativity. They continue to show us how to define those social norms and find our power, to be empowered. Those that draw outside the lines continue to remind us that we must welcome that presence of queerness and Blackness as an essential strategy to the advancement of Black people and ultimately all people. Y'all mind if I give you a little stats? Y'all still with me, right? All right. So when we talk about erasure, those outcomes are drastic. 2023 alone, more than 400 anti-queer bills have been introduced across the country. That impact to queer youth of color have a negative compounding effect on the mental health, forcing our identities in the shadow. In 2018 to 2021, 19% of Black queer young adults reported attempting suicide, compared to 12% of their white peers. 1 in 4 Black, transgender, and non-binary youth report a suicide attempt in the past year, more than double the rate of suicide attempts compared to just Black cisgender members. 25% of Black LGBTQ individuals reported experiencing discrimination. We got 86% of Black queer individuals that report that discrimination has negatively affected their spiritual well-being to some degree, compared to 69% of their white counterparts. The continued acts of violence, discrimination, marginalization show that silence and erasure will not save us. The disparities show that we collectively fail by not telling a Black history that is not queer enough. We must identify the intricacy of identity in queer erasure in history in order to understand Black history better. If we can honor Black queer people, we can learn how to be better to each other. We can find more systems of community care and mutual aid. We could free people from that internalized anti-Blackness. We invest in society that enhances our well-being by tackling everyday forms of violence and oppression. Bell Hooks stated and said it best: healing cannot happen in isolation. And the emphasis here is how therapeutic our communities can be when we're together. Our people have an amazing way of reclaiming the stories of our humanity while protecting those of our ancestors. Look what we do here at Black Heritage Trail. We must do more than whisper their truths when we identify Black queer history. We must honor them for it so those like me can continue to draw outside the lines unapologetically. Thank you.
Well, the working title to my talk has changed from that which was published. The title is Pauli Murray, a Transformative Figure. Now, from the title, you might infer that Pauli Murray was a transgender person. In fact, she was a transgender man. But I shall refer to her using the pronoun her. I will use she and her. And why will I do that? Because those were her pronouns. She lived life, she presented, and she lived life as a woman. And that, I think, informs how we can think of her. So I'm going to respect her words for her. Now, in part, this story about Pauli Murray is a personal story. You see, I met Pauli Murray in April of 1976. I was chair of the Black Law Students Union at Yale Law School. Now, Yale had had a long history of Black people at the law school, but that was a thin history. We Black students there knew the names of all of the Black law graduates, and many of us could recite their names. What I knew about Pauli Murray then was that she had earned a JSD, the research degree, the Doctor of Juridical Science degree from Yale Law School in 1965. And as I searched for a signature event for my chairmanship, we came upon the idea, and at the insistence of one of my classmates, we invited Pauli Murray to be honored at a testimonial dinner for her in the spring, hence this picture. Now you can't see that picture anymore, but it,
It was up there.
it was there. You know it exists. And in that picture, you see at the far right, Pauli Murray. You can tell that this is dated at a particular point in time because my classmate Oscar Blayton, who became a civil rights attorney in Hampton, Virginia, Oscar is there smoking. Next to him, if I can see properly, is in the background is that Otis Cochran, who was the first national chair of the Black Law Students Association and would go on to be a public interest attorney. There is Thomas Emerson, Tommy the Commie, we used to call him, because of his belief in and his defense of free speech, even for communists. He was a member of the ACLU's national board and well acquainted with Pauli Murray. I think, who's that next? Is that Lewis Pollock, the former dean of Yale Law School, who had been on the team of the NAACP when Brown versus Board was argued and won. And finally, at the end of the table, that fellow with more hair and all the same color that it was born with, more hair than I, that is moi. Now, when I met Pauli Murray, what I did not know about her could fill a book, and it has. She is, in fact, the most important personage in the civil rights movement that most of us have never heard of. What I found out about her was that she refused to be boxed. And when I say that, I mean I found that out on that night. The Black Law Students Union had invited her to speak, and she gave a speech on women and equality. Now, perhaps if I had known more about Pauli Murray, I might have expected this. If I had known, if I had investigated her history as a member of President Kennedy's Commission on the Status of Women, I might have guessed. If I had known of the refusal of Harvard Law School to award her the Rosenwald Fellowship for the LLM, that was traditionally awarded to the person graduating #1 from Howard Law School, I might have guessed. If I had known of her status as one of the founding members of the National Organization for Women, if I had known of the speech that she gave in 1963 criticizing sexism in the civil rights movement, if I had known of her article, a signature article, Jane Crow and the Law, Sex Discrimination and Title VII, if I had known of that law review article, super important in the understanding of how far Title VII could be pushed. If I had known of these things, if I had investigated, if I hadn't been lazy, if I had not simply depended and trusted in my classmates, I might have known that Pauli Murray was someone who lived outside of the box and stepped beyond the expectations of those around her. Now, Pauli Murray had been born in Baltimore in 1910 and essentially orphaned as a wee toddler, only 3 years old. She, as a result, grew up in Durham, North Carolina. She was a girl who refused to wear pants. And she grew up, she refused to wear dresses. She wore pants. She grew up in the height of American apartheid and the age of lynching. This was also a time when the Supreme Court would when she, during her early years, this was a time when the Supreme Court would wrestle with such weighty issues as whether it was permissible to disallow women from working the same hours or in the same industry as men. As she would point out in her writings later, it was a time not simply dominated by Jim Crow, but also of Jane Crow. For this is a time that suffered from the presumption that Blacks were inferior to whites and women were inferior to men. Now, she was unleashed upon the world as a graduate of Hunter College in New York City. She was unleashed in 1933 to seek her fortune in the Great Depression. She would not earn it. At one point, she rode the rails in the company of her first love, a heterosexual woman who in the end could not see Murray as she saw herself, a heterosexual man. The depression that emerged from feeling herself a man trapped in the wrong body would cause numerous psychiatric hospitalizations and indeed exploratory surgery to determine whether, as she suspected, there were testicles hidden away in her abdomen. After her first hospitalization in 1940, Murray had her second run-in with history. The first had been in 1938, when she had applied to the PhD program in sociology at the University of North Carolina. And she was expressly rejected because of her race. I say a run-in with history. She became a cause celeb in both the Negro and the general press, much to the dismay of her family, who were afraid of getting lynched. The NAACP, fresh on the heels of the 1938 Gaines case against the University of Missouri. In the Gaines case, it was determined that separate but equal did not mean separate and non-existent. There was no such program for Blacks offered by the state within the state. This was a winning case for the NAACP, but the NAACP rejected Pauli Murray's case. And why? Because at this point in time, she was no longer a North Carolina resident. She was a New York resident, and therefore the case was, in the NAACP's eyes, questionable. Now, it's 1940 when she has her second run-in with history. She is taking a bus. She's being taken by one of her friends from her hospitalization back to Durham, North Carolina. And in Virginia, Black people understood that they had to move to the back of the bus in accordance with segregation laws. Pauli Murray did not move, and she wasn't trying to be a troublemaker at this point. The seat where she would have had to sit was broken. So she stayed, and she was arrested for violating the state segregation statute. This was a good case, the NAACP thought. But the trial judge in that case outfoxed the NAACP. And how is that? Because the judge dropped the charge, the criminal charge, with respect to violating segregation statutes, and only convicted her of disturbing the peace. Now, in 1960, those of us who are lawyers here will know the case of Boynton versus Virginia. In 1960, it becomes clear, and the Supreme Court says that such laws violate, the Interstate Commerce, the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. Did I get that right? Do you remember? I believe I'm correct too. But this was 1940 and not 1960. Now, this experience is the impetus for her application to and matriculation in the fall of 1941 at Howard University's law school. Third run-in with history. In 1943, she led what may have been the first student sit-in, and it was successful. For those of us who know Washington, D.C., there was a restaurant at the corner of 14th and U Northwest that served, and this was a Black neighborhood, that served only whites. She and other Howard University law students, she was, if memories serves correct, the president or the chair of Howard student chapter of the NAACP. They sat in at that restaurant, and eventually the restaurant gave in. She would graduate first in her class at Howard University's law school, but not before writing a senior paper for Spotswood Robinson. Robinson turned out to be one of the NAACP lawyers for Brown. Later, he would serve as the chief judge of the District of Columbia circuit at the appellate level. Not before writing this paper for Spotswood Robinson that would posit that the separate but equal formula of Plessy v. Ferguson was inherently flawed, because if that which were separate were truly unequal, nonetheless, the dignity of, and this is a word she went to her dying day using, the dignity of the Negro was injured. Think about that. The dignity of the Negro was injured. Students laughed, and Robinson would dismiss her, but he kept her paper. And later he would admit that it had been helpful to the case that the NAACP made in Brown. This, I'm losing count, is another run-in with history. She would not get to attend Harvard, as I've said, to get that LLM that went to #1 in the class, but she did earn an LLM at Berkeley, where she began the research that resulted in 1952 in a mammoth book. It's on my shelf at the office, States' Laws on Race and Color. Thurgood Marshall called it the Bible that they consulted at the NAACP. Is that another run-in with history? It's not the Bible, the only Bible that she ever wrote. She wrote, as I've said, Jane Crow and the Law, Sex Discrimination, and Title VII. She was one of the lawyers on White versus Crook, a district court case in Alabama in 1966, in which she argued successfully that it was unconstitutional by virtue of the Equal Protection Clause to exclude Negro women from the jury. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in I think it's 1970 that she wrote this brief. Ruth Bader Ginsburg added Pauli Murray's name to the brief that she submitted in Reed v. Reed, one of the signature gender discrimination cases that, and really the first signature gender discrimination case of the modern era. She added Pauli Murray's name because Murray's theories, as presented in White versus Crook, were so central to the arguments that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would count much coup on in Reed v. Reed and in later cases. The lawyers who argued the Boy Scouts of America case in the year 2000 have stated as well that Pauli Murray's theories as presented in that case were fundamental to the argument that they presented with respect to discrimination on the basis of sexual preference in the Boy Scouts case. Now, by this point, 2000, she had suffered not from ennui, but from a sense of futility that the law could lead people to accept the sort of society that she sought to produce. And she repaired to an Episcopal seminary, where she became the first Black woman to be ordained a priest. And she preached. And this should resonate with us. Tolerance and the embrace of those around us, no matter their identity. In today's world, we recognize Murray as the subject of treatment in film. There's a wonderful documentary about her. You can find it on Amazon Prime, called My Name is Pauli Murray. And she is the subject of biographical literature and other study as well, as one of the underexplored figures of the civil rights and women's movements. Murray was a lawyer, a writer, and a civil and women's rights activist, and finally a priest. One is entitled to wonder what she might have accomplished had she had words to name herself. Today, we would recognize her, and she would probably call herself him as a transgender man. One is entitled to wonder what Murray did not accomplish, what deeds and thoughts were victim to depression, and for a long period, annual psychiatric hospitalizations. One is not entitled to wonder, however, whether she did good with her life. And if we need confirmation of that, we should know that in the year 2018, the Episcopal Church of which she was a member named her a saint.
Wow.
And so that is Saint Pauli Murray. I've not done justice to her entire story, but I've done in this short period of time the best that I can.
Thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions. And if you need a moment to think, I just have a couple questions. First of all, thank you very much. It was very enlightening, all the things that both of you said. And when you put them together, you know, it creates kind of this nice path that we could follow. So I have a couple questions because of the statistics related to the number of states that have anti-GLBTQ legislation, and combine it with mental health and people being able to live out fully who they are. What's some of your best thinking about how we might, as a community, really challenge the way that this state, New Hampshire, we don't have to go to anywhere else. We don't have to go to Louisiana, because we're talking right here in New Hampshire. I'm a native in Louisiana, that's why. What can we do as a community to really confront those things, knowing what we know about the impact that it is having, not might have, is having on especially youth? What are some things legally we could do and socially we could do? And I'll give you my mic.
Here we go.
You want to go first?
No, you go.
First off, I want to say, I think internally as a Black community, we need to educate ourselves. We need to become more aware and accepting of everyone and those around us. I think it starts at home for a lot of creating those safe spaces, which is where it starts for a lot of our youth of color for any type of trauma or mental health need, let alone identity. The other space is we need to show up. We need to show up at was it Concord? We need to show up and speak what we feel. We need to say what we need to say to our youth. We have to encourage them to be who they are unapologetically, because when we don't, when we tell our youth to keep it on the inside, don't wear that dress, don't wear this, cut your hair, don't cut your hair, you're a girl, keep your hair long. When we do that to our youth, we continue to put them back in when we need to create spaces to have them come out. So for me, it's show up, speak your truth, and encourage openness. Keep it short.
Well, I'll answer a little differently, and I will remind us that we live in a democratic republic. Elections count. If the question is, what can we do? We can talk to our friends and neighbors, and we can influence the course of elections. One is, I'll use the word again, entitled to wonder whether it is a majority of our neighbors who desire these anti-DEI, anti-LGBTQ sorts of initiatives. One suspects that this is a minority with outsized influence. One does suspect that. But we need to push the outside of the envelope. We need to prosecute our views. There are clearly others who are prosecuting theirs. If the question is, what can we do in law? How do we use law? As Ruth Bader Ginsburg did, as Thurgood Marshall did. What are the ideas out there that people who are pushing the outside of the envelope, like Pauli Murray did, what are the ideas out there? I wonder whether any of those ideas are effective in today's world with the current Supreme Court that we have. I think it's become very clear to us with the Dobbs case, that's the abortion case decided by the Supreme Court, and the Bruin case, that's the Second Amendment case decided by the Supreme Court, the New York Rifle and Pistol Club case from a couple of years ago. I think it's very clear that they are looking to historical analogs. And I think it's equally clear that that is a path which suggests that constitutional limitations on restrictions due to sexual preference and the like, that the state is going to have a freedom to act. This is the road that I think we're on. And because of that, it's my belief that what we can do now is to work with that portion of government that we have the possibility to influence. It's the legislature and it's the governor's office. And we as citizens have to exercise influence, if not control.
Any questions? Oh.
Thank you, Professor Diamond, for giving that overview of Pauli Murray. I don't actually have a question, but I want to say you can only cover so much of Pauli Murray in this time, but I did want to point out that she also was a poet and an author and wrote 2 autobiographies, Proud Shoes, The Story of an American Family, showing that, in fact, mixed race is really the norm in this country. And also Song in a Weary Throat, about her growing up, and also, or about her adulthood and the work that she did and the scrapes she got into and her many adventures, and her friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt and others. Thank you.
If I can just comment on that, Pauli Murray may have kept every piece of paper that she ever generated. And upon her death, she had those papers deposited in the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. Many of her private papers have been published, but many of them are in the Schlesinger. You will note she did not give her papers to Howard. She did not give them to Berkeley. She did not give them to Yale. She gave them to the library that was dedicated to constituting a depository for women's studies and the papers of women. So we know a lot about Pauli Murray. We don't have to guess about a lot. She is the author of two memoirs, one of them published posthumously when in fact she was contemplating her death. Pauli Murray is someone who gives us a window into an extraordinarily aggressive young person who wrote to Eleanor Roosevelt, who wrote to Franklin Roosevelt, who had the audacity to write to A. Philip Randolph and complain that women had not had speaking roles at the March on Washington. She was a person, if she was not in front of the line, she was behind and pushing the people in front to do the right thing.
Is it on? Thank you. My mentor, Dr. Morris. I have a comment regarding what can we do today? And I think that's relevant and significant. What we can do is stop allowing them to divide us. We are together. When we are together, how do you say it? Together we stand, divided we fall. And what they do every day that historical, history, and future, they're trying to keep us like puppets, dividing and conquer. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question somewhere around 12 years ago, 10 years ago. I would say maybe things had quieted down. People seem more accepting with LGBTQ, Black lives, things like that. Everything was getting normal, quiet down the last probably 8 years, due to propaganda, a lot of that got stirred up. And then you're wondering, okay, even with your kids, is it because was a lot of those feelings of racism, hatred, massage, whatever, was that always still behind the scenes, and the political environment and maybe propaganda from overseas awaken those feelings and make them more vocal because they never really changed in people? Do you think so pretty much what is your thought on that? Do you think that is it the politics and maybe propaganda from overseas? Because we saw what happened in the Olympics. People quickly took sides over the boxer Khalid, who was really a woman. I mean, but then that was actually brought up, and there was people on the people on the far right actually was pretty adamant that she shouldn't be boxing, and so I don't know what's your views on that, your take on that, because in reality.
My views are that this has always been here. I don't think a lot has changed. I think that social media, news outlets, propaganda, as you say, has made it more out in the open. And I'm going to say has made it comfortable for folks to be out in the open with their racism. has made it comfortable for folks not to stop it. And so it is our jobs to continue to speak the voice. It is our job to continue to have events like this, create spaces where we can have these conversations, vote. I think we need to get the old people out the office, excuse my French, that so we can change who's in there now and change those dynamics so that the propaganda can decrease. But I think it's always been there. And I just think whoever has been in office, we won't speak the name, allowed for a lot of that stuff to come out in the open and be okay. And that's where I see it. But I feel like it's always been there. We're in a constant cycle of history. I call it, you have the civil rights movement, and I feel like now we're in the new civil rights movement. And that's what I continue to say as I advocate and as I do activism. This isn't a fight that we don't know. It's just we're doing it differently now.
If I can step out of my lane as a legal historian and into my lane as an amateur meteorologist, I will simply say that seasons change. It is not so, in my view, that it has always been with us. If you look at the classical Western world, the Greeks had homosexuality. The Romans had homosexuality. And it did not receive the same sort of treatment that it has in the West post Saint Paul. In today's world, we treat sexual preference differently from the way we did when I was a boy. And even though our politics are in ferment, it is clear that seasons change. Now, there are always those who maintain old ways. This is certainly true with respect to race. There's no reason why it's not true with respect to gender and sexual preference and the like. But I don't think we are stuck in the moment that we are in. Who was it in Shakespeare who said, "Oh no, it's not Shakespeare, is it? It's the movie The Terminator." We have no fate but that which we shape for ourselves. Thank you.
Ray, while we have you here, why is it that the law is never straightforward? It seems like when you go to the Supreme Court or whatever, I can take something that, if I'm a judge, I can take something that maybe the law seem right or wrong, but it could be wrong, but I can make it right. I can give you any justification in the law. Why is there no really clear cut? It's weird. I just think,
Well, the answer to that is way longer than I have time. But let me simply say, if you want me to teach it to you, just come to LSU. We would be happy to take your tuition down. There is that which is clear in that there are right and wrong answers. But there are many where the answer is, it depends. It depends on facts, and it depends on the constitutional and other narratives that a court might undertake. And what we can see now is that we have a court which has a different narrative and a different set of values that it is trying to maximize than, say, the Berger Court or the Warren Court. So change is in the offing. The question is, how long will it take to occur? And that in part is a function of who is doing the nominations and whether the Senate will act on those nominations for the next round of the United States Supreme Court.
And I think we have to own the fact that a lot of the laws are based in white supremacist thinking. We just have to own that. And I think that oftentimes we skirt around that. It's deeply rooted in that way of thinking. So, you know, you get in this conundrum of how do you deal with the law? Who's interpreting the law? And it is open for interpretation. I think maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist for a reason. And I'll own.
What a great conversation, Tanisha and Dottie and Ray. And because we're here at SNHU on a college campus and speaking about the fact that, you know, education is so core to democracy and to helping people be seen and heard and learned and to learn and to push. So on my mind regarding the law is what's happening across education in so many states with the diminishment and actually cutting out chief diversity officers, not allowing conversations about EDI. So I just wondered if you'd talk about that a bit. I know as a college president here in the Northeast, I feel a lot of responsibility, not just for my own campus community in these conversations and pushing rights and fairness and justice, but also for my colleagues in other states. So would you talk about, you know, what you're seeing or hearing or how faculty help learners and how students support one another in states and campuses and K-12 environments where they're told to be quiet?
Okay. So let me say that I do not speak for the state of Louisiana, nor Louisiana State University, nor the Paul M. Hebert Law Center. I'm speaking for myself. I am a bit cynical about this period that we are in. I'm not at all sure that that the antis, if you will, really mean it, or whether they are simply using these issues in order to accomplish political power. But whether they mean it or not, we are where we are. And I am not simply cynical, but I am not at all optimistic about what the future looks like in those jurisdictions, particularly in the Deep South, where we have unitary, and I guess this is a political statement, Republican government. And it is not at all clear to me that university administrators at the top are going to have the strength or the courage to withstand. And this puts aside the issue of whether those administrators happen to agree with the anti-DEI efforts. In my own state, I think the university president believes in diversity and equity and inclusion, but we have been told to wipe our websites clean of the words diversity and equity and inclusion. For some, the question is, and I happen to agree with this, not what you say, but what you do. And what we do is a function of the people making decisions and their good faith and their direction. And that is going to be different depending on what faculty and what university presidents we have. I guess it is Brutus, rather Shakespeare, who said, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in the stars, but in ourselves. And we are going to have to look to ourselves to determine whether we have fault or not.
I'm going to take a harder approach. I'm going to start by saying knowledge is power. And I taught a class last winter at UNH, And I started my class with that saying, knowledge is power. When we as a collective begin to learn more about our history, the pieces that have been erased, the pieces that have been not talked about, when we learn things that folks did not know. I had students in my class where we would just talk about Malcolm X, for instance, and they didn't know much about Malcolm X other than he was violent and didn't know all the things or his impact to history. We talk about the feminist movement. They didn't know a lot of things of what the feminist movement has done. The Black women in the feminist movement, the queer in the feminist movement, and that's damaging, right? Because when you don't see yourself in the books, who do you look to? Who do you determine who, what you can be, what your future looks like? When we don't see ourselves in a history book, when we don't see ourselves as teachers, as priests, as directors, as CEOs, we begin to isolate ourselves. We don't grow to our potential. Our youth are more, their mental health suffers, right? They don't get what they need. And I feel like, I'm gonna go on a tangent, so stay with me here. That is why it's being shut down. That is why DEI is too powerful. Whether we call it DEI, whether we call it whatever, Jedi, whatever you wanna call it, right? That knowledge we're bringing, that inclusivity we're bringing, that acceptance we're bringing of, I see you for who you are, and I want you and all of you and how you show up to be my next director, to bring a different perspective, a different thought process that eventually breaks down that white supremacist system that is built in everything that we do. That changes things. The world begins to change. Our thought begins to change. The community changes. It becomes a community of care, of healing, of growth, and that is power. That collective liberation that we're all seeking is power for our community. And when you take that away, you keep the majority as the majority. You keep those in power in power. Change does not happen. And for me, that is what I am seeing, the stifling of voices. Oh, you know what? We gave you a little bit. Y'all have become a little too much now. Let's bring it back in a little bit, right? We took it a step too far. Let's bring it back in and stay within the box that we either have put ourselves in or they have put themselves in. The allies are getting a little too loud. The organizations are collaborating a little too much, getting a little bit, going on. And that's my opinion. And I see that it's a struggle for educators right now. And I'm talking about educators down from the preschool level all the way up, you know what I mean? And I have teachers that want to teach this. They want to teach the perspectives, but they are scared. And that fear is another way to take back that power. So we need to do something, and we need to continue it. And we need to find presidents of universities that are willing to say, I don't care. This is what we're doing it, whether you write it in a word or not, because like you said, words don't matter. It is the action that we all take that makes change. So.
That sparked some questions. Do I need to run again? There's a question there and a question. Oh, there. Yeah. You know, one thing I want to raise is there was a question there. Can he go first since you've already, if that's okay? And then there's a question somewhere right here. I think that we should call the question also is, what happened to all of our chief diversity officers in K through 12 in this state? Okay, I'll leave it at that. The brother over here, yes, please.
So my question is, what do the resources for youth of color in Louisiana and New Hampshire look like, and where's there room for improvement? And I'm also wondering, what do resources look like for the parents of those youth of color?
first with New Hampshire.
Let's see, for New Hampshire, I want to say in New Hampshire, we are growing. We are increasing in those resources that folks need. Right in the back, there is a therapist of color. So that is a resource. Y'all could clap for them. Go ahead. Organizations like Seacoast Outright are doing great things for youth of color and queer youth in general. BLM has a youth movement that is doing some things to collaborate to bring resources and private, not want to say private, but safe spaces for youth of color. I think as we continue to be growing in allies and organizations, you're seeing orgs come together more to put out more resources. But I will say we have a lot of work to do in New Hampshire. The past couple years, we've seen a shift in dynamics. We're at 12%, y'all corrected me, 14% BIPOC right now. And so that shift in itself is creating spaces and opportunities. So, but we have a lot of work to do.
Well, if New Hampshire has a lot of work to do, I'm not sure how to quantify what we have to do in Louisiana. And my wife, who's sitting right there, is about to shrink in her seat because I think she suspects that I'm about to sing. And the answer is money, 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 money. And I think in my state, we are simply unwilling to spend money on quote social problems. Again, we have a unitary government of Republicans whose agenda is to shrink the state budget, to starve the budget of tax dollars. New Hampshire at least believes in property taxes. We don't even believe in property taxes. We believe in sales taxes, and now we want to cut that. So what is the answer? I think part of the answer has to be in what we do. I've been thinking about Alexis de Tocqueville recently, and de Tocqueville spoke of not simply democracy from the bottom up, but community activity and community building, not by the government, but by local organizations and by neighbors together. I think this is something where we have to do what we do at our churches and in our community organizations. I'm reminded of my Uncle Armand. I did not know until he died because there were testimonials at his funeral that the neighborhood boys considered him to be their mentor, that he taught them to be a man. I think that is what we have to do. We have to embrace our young people as individuals and with communities. And I will offer something else from Pauli Murray, if I can remember it. Pauli Murray spoke of the value of tolerance and of love for individuals. And I think we have to remember that our LGBTQ young people, they're not somebody else. They're not the other. They are our children. They are our cousins. They are our friends and our friends' children. They are us. And I think that that Pauli Murray's value of tolerance and inclusion, I think that that is something that can be taught, that people can understand when they see that that which they think affects the other actually affects them.
Yes, please.
Good morning. Oh my, that's loud. You all spoke to some extent or the other, the idea of the erasure of Black history. And I'm thinking about the erasure of Black history within the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm wondering what the wider LGBTQ plus community can do to help sort of unerase that Black history, and better honor and support the intersectionality of Black identities and queer identities. Thank you.
I think first is being aware of those intersecting identities, and acknowledging the pain, trauma, the balancing act that a person goes through when they have those intersecting identities. I think it's creating safe spaces that allow people to talk about those intersecting identities, to talk about history. I think it's sharing those banned books. I think it's supporting those bookstores that are selling those banned books. I think it's giving out those banned books to youth and saying this is your history. I think it's putting money into organizations that are doing the work of creating those spaces and providing that education. You have orgs all across New Hampshire that are doing nothing but sharing the information, that are giving out the books, that are crossing those barrier lines, in the schools and anywhere else. I think it's continuing to speak up. I think it goes beyond just sharing a graphic. I think it is putting work into everywhere we go. I think it's bringing the conversation back to the dinner table. I think it is interrupting people. All of the above is what we need to do, whether it's queer history, Black history, any of the above. We need to go and do more of this too. This conversation is so impactful and is so eye-opening for many to understand the nuances that a person and the many levels of persons that we are have to go through and have to live through. We always don't know our history, and that is so unfortunate. And we're in a different time. We don't often, and I was just saying this to a friend of mine, you don't often see, we're not on the porches with our grandmothers sniffing peas, understanding what happened to great, great, great grandmother years ago, or what they did to fight and create those acts of resistance. That's not happening. Our youth are on social media. They're on their phones. They're on the computer. They're on the computer in school. Everything is different. We're not having these conversations. And the more that we sit in these conversations and understand and listen without judgment, right? Without trying to tell someone what they should be feeling and allowing that person to just be, we're not going to get anywhere.
And I'm glad you raised the idea of listening. So, sorry, the whole idea about listening, because I think that even within all the movements, there could potentially be some discrimination and oppression. So the LGBT community is no different. So there could be some racism, some sexism, the list, classism is a big one within the LGBT community or any community. So if those who are disenfranchised speak, I would really encourage those with dominant identities to listen rather than to defend. I'm not racist. You just called me racist. Well, I didn't say you were racist. I was basically saying that behavior reinforces a racist narrative. So I think that those are the harder conversations to have, because it's hard if you believe yourself to be a particular way and someone is reflecting back to you something else. It's hard. And that's the only way that I think that through this is that we are willing to have those hard conversations. So I'm glad you brought up listening. Okay.
I actually back here, Dottie, back here. Hi.
Oh, I heard voices. I was like, I need to go
I'm back
to
here
in the back.
I have a question from the chat. And unfortunately, due to our time, this will be our last question.
Sorry.
The question is, can I ask if there is more folks would say on whether words matter? Words do traumatize, and until we recognize that, we will keep giving the anti-DEI folks power. Thank you.
So the question is asking if words matter.
Yes.
Or maybe how?
How words
How my
matter.
words matter? Yes. I'm on the fence on this one. I do believe words matter. I also believe words matter more when there's action behind it. So my answer would be the words matter with action. If there's no action behind it, if you're not putting action behind what you say, your words don't matter to me. Simple, quick.
And I might add to that, and perhaps in disagreement, that words do matter. They matter even if we who speak them don't do anything. We need not incite other people to act, but our words may well instigate other people to act. Our First Amendment gives safe harbor to our words. And obviously, there are some words at the margins that we can't say. You know, fire in the crowded theater is the quintessential example. But if our words are not to matter, we would not speak them. So I think words do matter. And it's incumbent on those of us who hear words that are troublesome. We need to speak other words. We live in a political system where we depend on communication. We depend on people being able to communicate their ideas. So it's incumbent on us to do that.
So it sounds like words matter, and at the same time, words without action may not matter as much. So that if I put the two of them together, is that the words matter. And we do know that words inform behavior, or it should inform behavior, but it seems like it informs it more when it's a negative thing. So if you think about derogatory terms are often used before a violent act does occur. So we have to think about that. So anyway, it has been a pleasure, but before we go, we have 1 minute. So if everybody was asleep and we woke them up just now, and you go, wow, I have 30 seconds to tell these people something I want them to remember since they just woke up, what would be that thing, their parting gift, so to speak?
You go first.
There are giants who have lived among us, and we should know who they are and know their deeds.
That woke y'all.
I'm going to add to that and say, I agree. And I'm going to add and say, listen to them, educate yourselves of them, listen to what's happening now, get involved, and donate. Donate to orgs like Black Heritage Trail, BLM, New Hampshire Center for Equity and Justice, all of that. Donate, because money matters.
And I have 3 suggestions of films by the same person, John Scagalotti. If anyone has ever heard of him, he did films such as Before Stonewall, After Stonewall, and Before Homosexuals. That's the name of his 3 major films. They are all documentaries. And he also did a film that was the most disturbing for me. It's called Dangerous Living. But his name is John Scagalotti. He lives in Vermont. And so Yeah, so if you want to get some historical pieces, those, the three films that I said earlier really gives a firm foundation about the movement. So thank you very much. And thank you for your pearls of wisdom through your question.